Good morning. Welcome to the Civic Pulse with David Bonior and Brian Brady. Excited to be with you today on May 29th. We have a lot going on in the world today. We're going to zero in a little bit on Ukraine, where David has been doing some interesting work. But first, we're going to talk a little bit of current events and politics with David and get his take on, a lot happening in Washington. It's hard to keep up. It's hard to keep up with the corruption, David. It's a corruption buffet, I call it.
Yeah, it's not funny. I know I'm laughing, but it's pretty endemic, this administration, and it emanates from Trump, he's got some corrupt genes in him. I think he always has had. He stiffed a lot of people in business over his business life, and he's just trying to do it now with the government.
Yeah, it's almost like he is just getting more outrageous in how he's doing it too. The meme coin. I mean, that's $1 billion a month from what I've been reading. The whole crypto piece, right? And
the crypto piece is just really fraught with corruption and his involvement and his son's involvement. And also, I would say, the airplane thing with the Qataris and, come on,
Vietnam just fast-tracked a hotel for his family, right? In order to get their tariffs.
Yeah, it's just
leveraging the tariffs for personal deals, right?
Right, one thing after another, and it's, it just sends the signal that the way to get ahead is you do this kind of stuff. If you're a government official, or even if you're a business person and you want to take a shot and gamble and try something like this and to get some financial benefits. It's just really bad because once you get a country is sucked into an epidemic of corruption. You see a lot of this, by the way, in the Middle East as well as in Latin America. I regret to say, it happens everywhere. But I mean, you see it. Yeah. You see it to degrees that are just unconscionable, and in these places, and it's just hard to change society around. Actually, they tend to be places where the corruption is so bad that they create the opposition to try to change the government. That is the motivating piece in a lot of countries that are struggling for their independence, is the corruption that the leaders have. And so, yeah, it's really bad. I mean, this whole kleptocracy that the Russians are engaged with, that's how Putin, he did it with, I'd like to say a handful, but it's probably more than that, of wealthy Russians who picked a part of their economy and then Putin gave them the green light, and they went out and
they kicked back.
The whole thing,
Putin,
really bad. And so
these pardons for sale too. Have we ever had pardons for sale like this before?
What's for sale? I'm sorry.
Executive pardons.
Pardons.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not going to be naive enough to say we haven't. I think they did do quite a bit of pardons in the 19th century, the 1800s. I think there were some of them, and so but to this degree, no, it's crazy.
Headlines in Chicago paper today is Larry Hoover, probably the most famous gang member in Chicago history, next to Al Capone. Next to Al Capone is number one, but Hoover is a close second here. It was sentenced to 200 years about 35 years ago. And Kanye West appealed to, I guess they call him Ye now, appealed to Trump to let Hoover go, and he did, which it's interesting. I think Hoover's about 65, 70 now, but he kind of still calls some shots in Chicago. Yeah. I can't imagine that is going to go over that well with his political base, but he can do whatever he wants with his political base.
They seem to tolerate it because he's been doing it, and they tolerate it, which is that's a bad sign, where you have a significant percentage of your population that will tolerate this kind of behavior. Not good for the future. So when people say that America is in decline, it's part of that is this kind of behavior and his kind of hubris and attitude towards government and people, and his unkindness towards people, and his despicable ideas with regard to people who served in the service, in the military. I mean, he takes them apart too. It's just outrageous what he's been able to do, and then get away with, because he got 2 million more votes than the Democratic candidate in this last presidential election.
Yeah, look. So this is the part of the show. You have to give me 2 minutes of political therapy, David, before we dive
Okay.
in. So I think our viewers would appreciate it too. I was in upstate New York. I left my liberal bubble of Evanston, which is 93% for Democrats.
Did you have the shakes for a few days?
Went to upstate New York, and there was a little party there, but I thought it was kind of still, a liberal crowd. And so I'm sitting there having a couple drinks with, a couple of guys, 65 to 7, who one runs an orchard, the other guy runs, grows food. But one of them used to be a Columbia College professor, economics professor and things. And so I think I'm in a safe zone, and I make a Trump joke, and they go ballistic. They're true MAGA heads and anti-government, and he's tearing, he's tearing up all this. He's draining the swamp in Washington, and they're even telling me he's reducing the deficit. So here's my therapy question. I debated them and kept it, it was a party, so I couldn't get too worked up, but they got worked up. They were fact-free. What they were trying to tell me that Trump is reducing the deficit. How do you were in a purple district, had to deal with pre-MAGA folks. What was your strategy when you engaged with folks who were were not really willing to have a discussion around facts?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. I've never been able to have a good discussion on the budget deficits with anybody over my whole political career in Washington or in Lansing, because budgets are fungible. Mm-hmm. You can't get the truth out of anybody on a budget, on a government budget or a state budget. And so you just talk in circles and you never get anywhere. So I just kind of, that's important. Someone's got to do that. I understand that. Yeah. I just lost patience. I couldn't deal with it. There's a lot of other problems I could throw my energies and enthusiasm into, but it wasn't over numbers. Well, although I love numbers too. Actually, I did really well in math when I was a kid. I love numbers because, they generally don't lie, but you can manipulate them, and people have. And so I'm not really into budgets. Now, when I would confront people in my town hall meetings on facts, and you just have to agree to disagree. So, yeah. I mean, I used to have these meetings in the 80s and 90s, a little bit in the 70s when I was in the Congress, and we get along pretty well up in Bonior. I had a lot of Republican areas. I used to go do little town hall meetings in farm areas and agricultural rural areas. Yeah. But the issue that I had the most difficulty with at a town hall meeting was immigration.
Oh, interesting.
And it would not infrequently, so it happened quite a bit. People with accents would get up at these town hall meetings and just take off on immigrants. Obviously, they were immigrants themselves. And then the only way I was able to calm meetings that evolved or devolved into the immigration debate was to ask them, how many here have had your grandparents or parents come to this country as immigrants, or yourself? And 2/3, 3/4 of the people would raise their hand. So that was my argument. Now, what's the deal here then? Why are we locking the door, pulling up the ramp, taking the ladder down, whatever you want to say? Why is that happening here? And that's a whole psychology piece. I don't want to get into. There's a lot of reasons people do that. Yeah. So it's a difficult issue, and I do the best I can, and then I move on.
Yeah. and you don't get
Usually I try to make a funny in there somewhere that will
like,
get their blood temperatures down a little bit, make a little funny, and then move on to something else.
move on. It's a tricky time, though. I mean, democracy is really a conversation. I heard
It
said
is.
on a
It should.
pod
Yeah.
recently,
Yeah. It should
but
be.
there's
That's
but
Go
the
ahead.
conversational doors seem pretty shut, like
Well, you just
between.
experienced it in New York. Yeah. So
Yeah, yeah.
it's
Um,
difficult. That doesn't mean there aren't things that we can't agree on, but it's very clear, I think, in your example, it demonstrates it. It's very clear that they are very defensive about their guy, Trump.
yeah,
And so,
yeah.
if you want to talk about issues, for instance, in rural areas, you can talk about veterans issues. You can talk about they're going to close all the hospitals. They're closing anyway, but they're closed. They're closing the hospitals. They'll get upset about those pieces,
Hmm.
and you can have a decent discussion. There are other issues as well that we can talk about and probably come to some agreement on.
Yeah, the last, I'm just surprised at how they're willing to look away from his corruption. That's so blatant.
Yeah,
That's.
it's
I
not
don't think they
everybody,
all
but
are.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. But he has a certain following that'll can do anything. Like he said, he could go down Fifth Avenue with a gun and shoot somebody, and his approval.
He's
No,
got
his
to.
approval.
Well, let's pivot to foreign policy.
Yeah, sure.
And let's first start a little bit with Gaza, because it's
Yeah.
that tragedy in Gaza just seems to never stop there. And you did some work with Israel and in the Middle East, and what is it going to take to get Netanyahu off the schneid and actually agree to end this war? How do you do?
Well, the fact that the Israeli people have allowed him to continue for so long is one of the more discouraging things that I've seen internationally in this decade. It's just horrific what he's been able to get away with. 53,000 is the number that I know of. The latest
It
number.
might be double. We don't even know.
We
Yeah.
don't know, yeah, because of the rubble that have been killed. And most of them innocent children, women, non-combatants killed. And the International Court of Justice in The Hague, they really want to indict him on that war. They've indicted them, or when I say indicted them, they've charged him with war crimes, and so they want him, and they want the defense guy that he had working for him, and those two guys on the far right in his government, Smidrich and the other one. But they have not been able to pull, get that done. And but he's leery because he knows, like Putin, if he travels, he's liable to get arrested. And of course, and there are a number of countries that have said if he comes to our country, we're gonna arrest him. And these are, I think Spain might have been one of them. I'm not positive of that, so don't quote me on it. But a number of European countries have made that commitment to get him. But he's a terrible, terrible man. He's a corrupt man, by the way. They go hand in hand oftentimes, and he's fighting his own battles in the courts in Israel. So I'm just I don't know what to say. I do know one thing that happened this week. In fact, maybe it was yesterday or the day before, that the former Likud prime minister of
Ehud Barak,
Ehud Olmert.
Omer.
Olmert. He was a very
Omer Barak,
conservative guy, but he said this. He came right out and said it. This killing all these innocent people. This is a war crimes. He called it war crimes. So I don't know what it's going to take to get him out, but he's just ravaged the reputation of Israel all over the world. And I still don't understand why he can get away with that in a so-called democratic country, but he has.
Yeah.
They don't understand how Trump can get away with it, what he does in a democratic country, but he has. So It doesn't
Yeah.
speak well for democracy, though, does it? So it's
It does. It doesn't. Yeah. We're seeing democracy hit its and will the courts, just to bring it back, as the courts seem to be the only check at the
right.
moment.
Well,
And
we had that decision last night or yesterday on all these tariffs. Look, Trump's going to do 25 here, 135 here to China. He's going to raise the tariffs everywhere. This International Trade Court, which three people, one of them was his person, one of them was Reagan's person, and one of them was Obama's person, unanimously said, you can't do this stuff. You cannot do these tariffs the way you've done it on individual countries. So that's a big thing now. So that's all going to be discussed and talked about. But he just
yeah,
says, I can do what I want. I can do what I want. We'll have discussions about the tariffs with individual countries. So we'll see where that goes.
well, we'll talk about the Constitution. I want to pivot to Ukraine here
Yeah.
in the veterans issues, but before that, you've been working on so much. But macro side, it seems like Trump is impossible to predict, but it seems like his relationship with both Netanyahu and Putin have worsened. Who knows why? Who's in his ear? What happened? I'm sure it has to do with his ego and who's whispering to him at any given moment. But he hasn't really done anything tough on them other than a little bit of verbiage. Do you see any rays of hope there on Trump actually doing something consistent on foreign policy here, or decent?
I don't see any hope for consistency, but I will tell you
Yeah.
this. There is some hope that he will be tough on Putin, because Putin's not going to agree to what he wants Putin to do. Putin's bent on defeating Ukraine, and he's not going to go for a 30-day ceasefire, as Trump suggested, and as Zelensky said, yeah, we'll be for that. No, it's not going to happen. And so, Trump wants the world divided into three pieces: spheres of influence: Russia, China, and the US. So he wants this relationship with the other two. And that's really a problem, because, Putin is a war criminal too, and a murderer.
Yeah.
You're dealing with really tough people here. And so you're asking me what's the effect it's going to be on Ukraine? I don't know, but I don't think we're going to reach any agreement. And the one thing the Ukrainians saw early on was it could come to this. They knew there was going to be an election, so they have become what's the right word? Self-sufficient in producing their own arms, to the extent that they've raised that number from 3.5 years ago for 20% to about 50% today, which is huge. And they have created the dynamics with the other European countries, with the EU countries, to get them to supply them with financial aid and weapons systems that will replace a lot of what the U.S. had basically been delivering under Biden, and for a while under Trump. So, they're trying to cover their bases. One thing I read recently, and I haven't seen anything written about this, but it's kind of a mystery to me, so I've got to check to see how accurate it was. But one of the key pieces of the defense for Ukraine is the satellite that Musk owns. Elon Musk, that's up in space. And this is a very key piece, because it's very significant in terms of protecting Ukrainian troops. And so there's a worry that Musk can just pull the plug on the Ukraine access to all of this. But the Japanese have also put something up there now, and it's supposed to be good or better than what Musk has. And they are giving it, as I understand it, to Zelensky. He can have it.
That's
He can
huge.
use it. So
Mhm.
maybe all this goes back to the Japan-Russo War in 1905 or 1899 or something. But that's good for Ukraine. So those two pieces, particularly. Now the third piece on the defense is defense of the cities, and the Russians have had some success, big success in the last 3-4 weeks. They've been, sending ballistic missiles in. They've got the supersonic missile.
Mhm.
These things get in fast. You don't have to really time
Mhm.
to get to the shelter. They travel at tremendous speeds, and then they have their drones, and they've sent hundreds of drones and some of these ballistic missiles. And I don't know if they've used their supersonic missile this last couple of weeks because they don't have that many of them, but they're just really dangerous. But the Patriot system that we have shot down all three of those kinds of missiles
Mhm.
and drones that they use. So we need to do a better job of getting more defense in there for them. And the Europeans have some of these Patriots. They need to be more forthcoming to help Kiev and Lviv and Odessa and some of these other big cities like Kharkiv to have those defensive systems in place to protect their citizens. And we'll see if any of that is forthcoming. But I think, to answer your question, I roam around here. To
No, it's
answer
a good. It's a good roam.
to answer your question, I think what Putin does, if he keeps playing Trump and Trump sees it that way, and actually Trump does see it that way now. He's even talking about being played, being tapped.
Mhm.
That's his words. Uh, he could go and decide to give them more Patriot missiles, the Ukrainians, which would be great.
I noticed that General Kellogg is still in the picture. He hasn't been fired yet, which gives me
Yeah.
some little ray of hope. We know he half gets it at least. So hopefully he can.
No, he's a smart guy, and I was very encouraged when I heard that Trump was going to ask him be the lead, but he's not the lead anymore. But he's in the discussions, so that's important.
Yeah, Putin won't talk to him. He's got that Witkoff guy, like the former
Yeah,
traitor.
yeah,
uh, well, I want to dive a little bit into your work with veterans, both here and in
yeah,
Ukraine.
yeah.
But
So yeah,
before
sure.
we do that, I want to. This is an issue. This is a 40-year issue for you. So I trace this back to when you started to work on veterans issues in the States and how that came about before we talk about the Ukraine uh, Vietnamese veteran exchange you're going to do.
Well, I got it. I was in Air Force. I was in the Air Force from '68 to '72, but I was not a combatant. I was basically stationed in California. But I knew a lot of combatants uh, in the war. And I was really distressed by the fact that the way they were treated when they got off the planes in San Francisco and other places in California on their way back from Vietnam. The spitting at them, the harassing them, all of that. I mean, these are people who have been in war and have this enormous uh, psychological weight to carry with them. A lot of them with post-traumatic stress disorder. So
Mhm.
anyway, the upshot was when I got out of the Air Force, I actually was elected soon after that to the state house in Michigan. And
Mhm.
then I went to Congress. When I get to Congress, they became a priority for me to try
Mhm.
to help heal that part of our community that had borne the brunt. And whether you like the war or not, I didn't like the war. Wasn't for the war, even though I was in the service at that time. But you have to respect people who, fought and were
Mhm.
told it's the right thing to do, and who came back with not only physical wounds but deep, deep mental wounds. So I wrote a book about this with Steve Chaplin, a wonderful guy. He used to work for me, and he was very active in forming Vietnam veterans in Congress and very active in other Vietnam era veteran issues, Vietnams of America. And then Tim Colley worked for me, who was a combat veteran in Vietnam. And
Mm-hmm.
the three of us put this book together called Vietnam Veterans, A History of Neglect. Now, what's the history of neglect? The history of neglect is this. There was a real generational divide back in the 70s and the 80s in the Congress between younger veterans like us. And that, well, we were 11 of us when we started. Like Al Gore was there, Leon Panetta was there, trying to think, Tom Harkin. These were all
Mm-hmm.
Vietnam era veterans, others as well. There were 11 of us. And I formed this group. I was founded it, caucus. And we decided to go to work to try to get the GI education benefits for these people raised, hadn't been raised in a number of years, to try to deal with the Agent Orange question. This is the dioxin
Oh
poison,
yeah.
kill you, it's cancerous. And we sprayed it all over Vietnam. And this, it's just horrific what we did to the country with this
Yes.
stuff.
Yeah.
But it was under the guise that we were trying to protect our troops, but we killed our troops with it as well. But a lot of our troops had the problem. So we had hearings and, testimony, and we finally ended up giving them the help they needed, plus some compensation as well
Mm-hmm.
on Agent Orange. And then there were just a host of other veterans issues on housing, job opportunities. We created something called, for federal jobs, you would get a bonus if you were a military veteran in terms of being able to get the job. So,
You were involved with the memorial too, weren't you?
yes,
And
but
so,
not as much. The key people in the memorial were Jan Scruggs and Bob Duback, and
mm-hmm.
another guy that they worked with by the name of Wheeler, who's passed on. But those two were the key people in getting that thing done. They single-handedly started from scratch, and they did a miraculous job. And they got it done, and it made a huge difference in healing the country, the memorial. In fact, I wrote in my book later, another book that I did, a memoir, that while I and others were concentrating on these other substantive issues, they were prescient and smart enough to understand that before we could get that done, we had to have more closure in the country with regards to those who fought the war. And that's what that memorial did. And
Yeah,
so
I
that,
would. It's unusual. You don't usually see a memorial have that kind of impact, but that's one of the few that really did
it really
have.
did. It really did. It was a very moving place, and I had the honor of speaking at they had two ceremonies on it for it, and at one of them with I think Reagan spoke that day as well. It was a highlight of my career to be involved with that. Although I was busy with other stuff. It was Dubeck and Scruggs who really basically
Who
did
pushed
that.
it through.
So anyway,
So
well, I
yeah.
worked on all of these things. All right. And the one issue that I really was emotionally linked to was the issue of post traumatic stress disorder. And I wrote about
Mhm.
it in my recent piece that will be going out to many people on this podcast who get it.
Mhm.
I wrote, what does that do to a soldier out there who's fighting, whether it's in Ukraine or was in Vietnam? What is this? What is this post traumatic stress? And it'll destroy a person's life. You can't
Mhm.
sleep. You become aggressive. You develop habits of alcohol and drug abuse. You're
Mhm.
not good to your family. It's just all terrible stuff because you can't get it together. You've got this stuff is in your head. We know
Mhm.
that therapy can help cure this,
Mhm.
or if it's not cure it, at least make it palatable for people to go on.
Mhm.
And therapy requires psychologists that are trained and programs to implement. So we passed legislation to do that. It was not a hard thing to make people understand. It was a relatively easy sell once we got them past the idea that these guys weren't just a bunch of hippies out in the woods fighting, which they had in
Yeah.
the heads. And we,
Yeah.
we did have that problem with some of our older veterans who ran these committees.
Mhm.
They were World War II veterans, but they ran the committees. Not all World War II veterans in the House were like that. In fact, most of them were with us, and that we were able to get things done around them by going through Tip
Mhm.
O'Neill and other people and getting our bills referred to sequentially to not only the Veterans Committee, but the other committees. And the other committees did what we wanted. We got it to the floor. We passed this stuff. So when I'm in Ukraine, I'm going to anticipate your next question. When I'm when I'm in Ukraine, I'm thinking to myself, we went there in 2023. Peter Daley and Jim McDermott,
Mhm.
former congressman and psychiatrist as well, and Tanya Kepler, and we had one other person I can't remember. No, I mean that was it. That the group right there. We worked on refugee issues
Mhm.
because that's when millions of people in Ukraine were trying to get out of the war, get away from the war, mostly children and their mothers and their guardians. The men were
Mhm.
getting ready to fight and fighting. So we worked on the refugee issue, and the religious community in Poland was just amazing, just absolutely amazing. They took in literally millions of people, and they did it without one refugee camp, without one tent camp. They housed them in churches and monasteries and schools.
Mhm.
You got millions of
Catholic
people.
Church,
Catholic Church was unbelievable. Catholic Church
heroic,
has a
yeah.
lot of problems, and
Yeah.
I've been on the other side of the church on a lot of issues that revolve around sexuality. I'm not going
Mhm.
to tell you. You can imagine what they are. But on
Yeah.
this issue, on taking care of the poor and the immigrants and the refugees, can't beat them. They're great. So
Yeah, exactly.
anyway, what I'm pointing to here is that I thought to myself, what can we do? What can I do? Here, I'm an old guy, I'm 80 years old. What the hell, what can I do here to help Ukraine? And I thought, well, maybe this healthcare crisis is really serious in Ukraine. They have high numbers of
Mhm.
people who are suffering from post-traumatic stress, anxiety, depression. Maybe we can do
Mhm.
something to help. And so I decided to hook up U.S. veterans with Ukrainian veterans. And I'm taking 3 of them over there to visit with Ukrainian veterans when I go in the fall, this
That's
fall, and then also raise some money. So I'm raising money to give to 6 organizations that are doing this therapy throughout Ukraine, and they're in Kiev and Odessa and Lviv.
Mhm.
And other places. There's six of them. And Caritas, which is the charitable arm of the Catholic Church, is all over the place in Ukraine. So they're doing great work. Anyway,
As you and I know, it's a pretty macho culture, which
yeah,
gets back to sort of those World War II vets who are like, "Oh, we didn't
yeah,
need any therapy," kind of
yeah,
stuff,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so
That's
you have
changed.
to. Has that changed a lot?
That's changed because they know that therapy works because they see it from
Yeah.
their friends that have had it, and like the same in the U.S. It changed attitudes here, so they're open to it. And the church, which had not been really great on psychology, the Catholic
Mhm.
Church, they've changed their tune. Now they're training at the Ukrainian Catholic University in Lviv, which is a grade school.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
they're training Catholic priests in psychology so they can recognize these problems in their parishes and the people that they deal with and get them help.
Well, this makes me think we need to, how we did our live show. This will end up being a teaser for our next show, but I think we should get Dr. Eric Trupin on and
Yeah,
Emily Rudkowski and a couple Ukrainian folks that you've been working with, and do an actual live show so some of the folks who tune into this can tune in and interact with some of these interesting people you've been talking to, David.
yeah, they do
Uh,
great work. Dr. Trupin, Jim McDermott, uh, he did great work with me when I was in the Congress working with Vietnam veterans. Um, and then is fantastic. Emily, by the way, for some of you who may not know, is founder of Misha's Angels, which we have plugged, and you and I have helped her
mhm.
support that as well as our friends. So it's one of the 6 projects, and they actually go to the front line and get the fighters on the line what they need, whether it's warmer clothing or night goggles or um, they have these things that can discombobulate Russian drones. It's
Oh
important
yeah,
that too. So
and a lot of medical. When are you leaving?
medical
When's your trip
equipment.
schedule? When's your trip scheduled for
Well,
Ukraine?
it's not. It's going to be the last 2 weeks in September. We're going to start it, and it might lap over into a few days in October. That's
Okay.
tentative. This changes. I was scheduled for a 2 week trip, as you know, in
Yeah.
the beginning of April. I had all these meetings set up, and then I have my broken wrist and my legs swelled up because I'm getting to be an old man, and flying wasn't recommended, so I had to cancel that trip. And so now it's back on. We're going to meet with the groups that are providing these opportunities for these civilians and combatants, veterans, and be a good trip. And then bringing the veteran community from the U.S. there to bond a little bit.
That's great. And we'll put in the notes here, but it's also in the op-ed that we'll send out how you can support the veterans in this
Yeah.
in Ukraine. Because I think
Yes.
as we know, the war hopefully will end in the next year, but then there's going to be a healing process that will be generational, right?
Exactly.
Uh,
And the
uh,
veteran community is a huge percentage of the population in Ukraine, and it'll be important that they are healed or on their way to being healed as they enter that next phase of the life in Ukraine. So it's important work.
well, let's go deep with the experts on healing from war. I think that'd be an interesting show to do later in June,
Yeah,
and see when we get Dr. Troopin on
true.
and
Yeah, yeah.
Emily.
Eric would be great to have on, and Emily as well, because she's been there. She's been on the lines, and she's her uh, special
And her
other
boy
boyfriend.
and her
Mike.
boyfriend who has gone through it all too. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. He's been in the line. He's a U.S. Marine. He got
Hmm.
shot when he was a U.S. Marine, and now when he was on the line training Ukrainian troops, he was shot as well. But he's survived that. His hearing is affected, but anyway, he's a great guy, Andrew. Yeah.
And the new research on moral injury, which is kind of
Yes.
a new subject that Emily has knows a lot about, would be interesting to
It
explore as
would be
well.
really good to hear from her on that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
She's, by the
great.
way, from
Well,
my old district, and she's fabulous. Emily Rutkowski. Her
she
grandmother
is amazing.
used to cook at the Polish Century Club on Outer Drive on the east side of Detroit. And
That's great.
she's got Polish and Ukrainian in her, just like me.
And has heroic courage. She runs around
Oh,
Ukraine and
does
she'll do anything.
yeah, she's an
Uh,
angel herself.
Definitely. Well, David, this has been wonderful to check in with you. We'll get our next show to go deeper on this subject, and hope everyone has a great week. And maybe by the next time we talk, there'll be rays of peace coming from
Hopefully, yeah.
the Middle East and from Ukraine. Let's cross our fingers for that.
Yeah, we can always hope and pray for that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks.
Good to see you.